What if the most powerful tool for understanding the universe isn't some giant telescope, but our own consciousness? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty wild frontier called psi-hacking, and this is where the lines between your mind, reality, and technology start to get really blurry.
So, the research we're looking at today kicks off with this massive, totally reality-bending idea. It suggests that consciousness isn't just something that happens in the universe, it's what the universe happens in. Let that sink in for a second.
I mean, really think about what that implies. Everything you see, everything you experience, it's not what creates your consciousness. It's being created by it. That is a huge mind-bending thought, right? And it's the absolute core question that's driving all of this research.
Now, this isn't just some abstract philosophical thing to kick around. There's a researcher, Mark Bakuchi, who is actively digging into these ideas with a project he calls psi-hacking. And the way he's doing it, well, it's definitely not your typical lab work.
Okay, before we get any deeper, we got to get on the same page with a key term here, psi. You can think of it as a catch-all term for stuff like telepathy or psychokinesis. But here's the big twist. This research doesn't treat them like superpowers. Instead, it explores them as maybe, just maybe, a basic built-in feature of how consciousness actually works.
So, let's say you're intrigued by this idea that consciousness shapes reality. How on earth do you even start to test it? Well, you might go looking for a mystery, something that has stumped mainstream science for decades. And not just any mystery, but one where what people experience seems to be just as critical as what any sensor can measure.
Yep, we're going there. We are jumping straight into the deep end with UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. It's a field just packed with radar data and weird sightings. But here's the thing. This research isn't really looking at the objects. It's looking at the people who see them.
And this is where you can really see the split in how people are looking at this. The usual approach, right? It's all about the hardware, the physical craft, how fast it goes, what it's made of. But the psi-hacking approach is completely different. It asks, okay, but what about the software? What about the human mind in the equation, the personal experiences? And what about all those persistent reports of telepathic contact that seem to come up again and again?
And listen, this isn't just waving your hands around and speculating. There's a real method here. They're digging into the phenomenology of contact, which is just a fancy way of saying they're looking at the raw, unfiltered, first-person stories of what it actually felt like. They're studying the physiology of telepathy and even documenting CE5 encounters. That's where people are actively trying to make contact. Basically, they're taking these personal, often dismissed stories and treating them like valuable data.
So, the big question is, how do you even begin to study something as slippery as consciousness? Especially when it's all tangled up with a mystery as deep as UAPs. Well, you don't use the old tools. You have to build a whole new toolkit from the ground up.
So what's actually in this toolkit? What does the process look like? It's this really cool mix of the old school and the super futuristic. It kicks off with good old-fashioned observation, just documenting these weird phenomena. But then, it throws in some seriously cutting-edge AI, using it to model scenarios, to create art, and then to wrap it all up and analyze the findings in white papers.
Let me give you a really concrete example of this. They're using AI to run these complex simulations, basically asking the AI, hey, what would happen if UAP disclosure became a real thing tomorrow? The whole point is to try and get ahead of the curve, to map out how the public might react. It's technology being used to game out one of humanity's biggest what-ifs.
And then there's this next part, which honestly is just on a whole other level of cool. The project actually includes an experimental music album called Songs in the Key of Psi. So the researcher, Mark, he comes up with the ideas and the lyrics. Then he teams up with AI tools like ChatGPT and Suno, and they actually co-write and generate the music together. Think about that. It's an artistic exploration of consciousness, created in partnership with an artificial mind.
Okay. Let's just take a breath. We've got UAPs, we've got AI simulating disclosure, we've got AI making music. It is a lot to take in. So what's the big takeaway here? What's the point of all this? Where is it all going? And this is really the heart of it all. You see, this was never just about proving aliens exist or making cool tunes with an AI. Those things, the UAPs, the AI, they're just the tools. They're the modern-day laboratory for tackling the biggest, oldest question we've ever asked ourselves. What exactly is consciousness, and what can it really do?
And what's so amazing about this approach is the mix of ingredients it's using. You've got the sharp analysis of a human researcher, right?
Then you add the insane processing power of AI. You throw in published, peer-reviewed science, and you top it all off with something that's usually ignored: personal, subjective experience. It's this whole package that says, hey, all of these perspectives have value.
And you know, this story is far from over. This isn't something that's already wrapped up. This is a living, breathing field of research. There are already new experiments in the works, like one called MindSight, which just goes to show you that the questions are getting bigger and the tools to answer them are getting more and more powerful.
So this all brings us full circle, right back to where we started. When you bring together human intuition, hard science, and the incredible power of AI, you're not just tweaking the old way of looking at things, you're creating a brand new lens to see reality. And the final question, the big one, is what happens when we turn that incredibly powerful new lens inward? What might we find, not light years away in space, but right here, inside our own heads?